Finally, when RCA premiered television, it convinced the government that the sound should be broadcast on FM. But they called it something else. They denied Armstrong all the money from his patent. Ask any electrical engineer who the greatest hero of the 20th century is, and almost all of them would say Edwin Howard Armstrong. But sadly, Armstrong thought he was a failure. On New Year's Eve, 1953, he stepped from the 13th floor balcony of his New York City apartment. The man who was the father of AM and FM was dead, but his inventions live on. Soon everybody wanted a radio station. Large newspapers, funeral homes, chiropractors, even bakeries, and just plain people applied for a license to the Federal Trade Commission. They bought the equipment, they hired a staff, and they got on the air. The American appetite for what would become a new piece of furniture in their home was insatiable. In less than 5 years, a network of stations was put together. NBC. Less than a year later, millions in 25 states would hear Charles Lindbergh as he was welcomed back from Paris. Some even heard pioneer newsman Lowell Thomas doing the coverage. America was hooked on radio for good. Because you see, in less than 20 years, radio went from dots and dashes and primitive squeaking sounds to organized broadcasting that was producing award-winning radio shows. Vaudeville stars who once played to several hundred people a day were playing to an audience of millions. Burns and Allen, Jack Benny, Fred Allen, Kate Smith became household names. The Shadow, The Lone Ranger, Tom Mix, serials, soap operas, comedies, and news broadcasts began to fascinate America. The exploits of Jack Armstrong and Sergeant Preston would be discussed not only at school, but around the office water fountain. But amid all of this, the Great Depression was growing, and there were war clouds on the horizon. No American president ever used the power and impact of radio better than did Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Because he was able to use the strength of his voice, his on-the-air persona masked the fact that he was crippled with polio and confined to a wheelchair. But on radio, FDR was a giant. It was during his run for office that he used the fledgling medium of radio to promise a new deal for America. But he gave few specifics. America was waiting. Then on March the 4th, 1933, he would get his chance to explain his New Deal in homes and stores, in churches and taverns, cars, taxis, and hotel rooms. America waited. What would he say? What would FDR say that would signal the rebirth of America? We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Roosevelt's words, transmitted to the far corners of America via radio, jump-started the American psyche. On March 4th, 1933, as one historian put it, a man who could not walk would begin to lead a crippled nation. The process of broadcasting meant that the rest of the country was reaching out. Laughing at a comedian was something you could do every day. Entertainment no longer occasionally found its way down the river on a showboat or arrived by train to a vaudeville house that could be hundreds of miles away. Now, by simply turning a knob, if the weather was right, Americans could sit around a massive pot-bellied stove in a continent-wide country store and share the laughter and the tears and the national news. Radio made this inclusion possible. It had become the cement that began to glue the nation together at a vital hour. The miracle of broadcasting, though, was a novelty for years until something happened in this country that provided an opportunity for radio to prove that it was more than an attractive music box. It would in many ways save the nation. A young journalist named Edward R. Murrow was sent to London to set up a news bureau for CBS in advance of anticipated war there. The network knew that if things happened as predicted, coverage from Europe would be essential. Not all the members of his new staff had great voices. When one of them filed a report back to New York, the head of CBS wired Murrow to explain why he had hired a reporter with such an un-radio voice. Murrow wired back, "Do you want someone who can talk or someone who knows what he's talking about?" That reporter was Eric Sevareid. Walter Cronkite would begin his wartime radio career working for United Press, but would later join CBS. Murrow began making live reports every night from rooftops as German buzz bombs rained death on London. He would later describe the liberation of the Buchenwald concentration camps in terms gut-wrenching that today are hard to read without sobbing. He ended his report by saying, "If I have offended you by this otherwise mild account of what I have seen at Buchenwald, I am not the least bit sorry." Radio took us through World War II with Roosevelt rallying the nation from his wheelchair, Churchill telling the world of his nation's finest hour, and the stars of radio telling us to buy more war bonds. America was united around the radio speaker. It heard CBS's John Charles Daly announce Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and again it heard Daly announce that FDR had died at Warm Springs. The euphoria of peace would expand the horizons of radio, and a little invention that Allied soldiers found at German radio headquarters in Berlin would revolutionize the way radio production was done. It was the magnetic tape recorder. The shows that were done after the war using this new technology, because they were mastered on tape, not on scratchy discs, sound live even when played today. Gunsmoke, Dragnet, The Adventures of Philip Marlowe. But in less than 10 years, the advertisers would go elsewhere and the actors would move to television. It is funny, if you go into the street and ask 1,000 people what was the greatest invention of the last century, it is likely that none would say radio. But it's no stretch of the imagination to say that were it not for radio, none of those other inventions would work very well. The computer is internally driven by radio-type signals. Certainly the concept of the airline was developed apart from radio, but from its earliest days, its avionics, its electronics, were based on radio. The ability of planes to communicate and navigate evolved and improved as radio got better. The recent rush to distribute the Internet to little handheld devices would only be a Buck Rogers pipe dream if radio were not possible. The thinking done by fax machines, the cooking of the microwave oven, radar in all of its forms, the cell phone, the automatic garage door opener, the TV remote, laser guns, radio-controlled hobby toys, GPS satellite receivers, automobile systems that call for help after a crash, monitors in baby rooms, pagers, beepers, pacemakers, CAT scan machines, and a million other products. Radio is the lifeblood of the millions of ham radio operators who chat every minute of every day throughout the world, but in times of disaster, abandon their chit-chat to provide vital communications, often serving as the only link in times of disaster. But sadly, this generation seems not to remember that radio is there at all. Has it become masked in the workings of all those other products? Watch the Super Bowl, your television is radio with pictures. How did we forget? At a time when there are millions alive who were born before radio, how could we as a people so quickly take for granted the work of men who made the dream come true? Marconi, DeForest, Sarnoff, Westinghouse, Farnsworth, Fessenden, Murrow, Cronkite, and Edwin Howard Armstrong. There is no national monument to mark this gift of God that came only during the past century. The 100th anniversary of the Fessenden Christmas broadcast was largely ignored. Commemorative postage stamps, well, there are a few, but most honor radio comedians such as Bob Hope, Jack Benny, Burns, and Allen. Maybe it's making too big of a deal to ask for more. Maybe it's too late to expect radio to be honored. Maybe brief moments such as this are the only tributes we have left. But do me a favor. Try to spend 5 minutes today without radio. Don't touch or turn on or use anything that has anything to do with it. You'll find yourself crawling into a cave. But don't bring your cell phone with you because it might ring there. Man harnessed radio waves and put them to use. This generation uses a gift that early man never dreamed of. This generation is part of a global village. This generation harnessed the fire in the sky without ever saying thank you. Thank you very much.